God forgave Egypt. He forgave Babylon. He forgave Nineveh. He forgave the cruelest nations of the ancient world. But to one single people, he said something he never said to anyone else. I am going to wipe you out from under heaven. That people was called Amalek, and everything you were taught about why God did not forgive them is incomplete. There is a missing piece, a piece that appeared 5 decades ago beneath the sand of the Negev, in a buried city no archaeologist expected to find. And when they understood which people it had belonged to, the answer to the most uncomfortable question of the Old Testament finally appeared. In the next 45 minutes, you are going to see that city. You are going to walk through 4 biblical scenes that almost no one connects, and you are going to understand one more thing: why that same ancient pattern is attacking your life right now, and you had never connected it. In the Negev desert, 15 kilometers southeast of Beersheba, there is a mound of earth. Beneath that mound, archaeologists found a city 40 times bigger than contemporary Beersheba, with copper warehouses, with incense artifacts brought from southern Arabia. And when they understood which people it could have belonged to, a question that has troubled believers for 3,000 years finally had a missing piece. Picture the scene. The year 1972. The team of archaeologists arrives at the site. The temperature exceeds 40 degrees Celsius. Dust covers the instruments. The first stones emerge, and they are large. They are not nomadic tent stones, they are wall stones, fortification stones. And as the days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months, an image begins to appear beneath the earth that no one expected to see. An image that would force experts to rewrite what they thought they knew about the enemies of ancient Israel. The site is called Tel Massos. The excavations began in 1972, led by Yohanan Aharoni and Aharon Kempinski of Tel Aviv University, together with Volkmar Fritz of the University of Mainz. What they found stunned the world of biblical archaeology. A huge city, fortified, dated to the period between the 12th and 11th century before Christ, the era of the judges, the era before Saul, and the strangest thing was its size. Archaeologist Ziv Herzog, also of Tel Aviv, calculated that it was 40 times larger than the Beersheba of the same era. It is like finding New York hidden next to a town of 5 houses. And who had lived there? That was the question that destroyed existing theories. It was not Israelite, the pottery did not fit. It was not Egyptian, there was no imperial architecture. It was not Philistine, it was too far south. And when they studied what was produced and trafficked in the city, an answer appeared. Copper. Copper brought from the Wadi Fainan, in what is now Jordan, and artifacts related to the incense route. That commercial network that crossed the desert from southern Arabia to the Mediterranean, carrying a resin extremely valuable in the ancient world, more expensive than gold in some periods. Tel Massos was the trading center, a commercial empire that controlled 2 of the most valuable resources of the ancient world in a single network. Look at the scale of that. Copper was the strategic metal of the early Iron Age. Without copper, there was no bronze. Without bronze, there were no weapons, tools, utensils, and Tel Massos coordinated the production of Wadi Fainan. The mines we now know through isotopic analysis supplied much of the southern Levant. And the incense route was not an occasional caravan. It was a network of several weeks of travel, controlling rest stops, water wells, armed escorts, warehouses. Whoever controlled the route collected tolls at every station. And the Amalekites, according to this reconstruction, were the ones collecting. That is why they were rich. That is why they were strong. That is why they were militarily capable enemies of Israel for centuries. They were not poor raiders looking for food. They were a commercial cartel defending their monopoly. The archaeologist Israel Finkelstein, one of the most recognized voices of modern biblical archaeology, proposed that this site could be, literally, what the Bible calls the city of Amalek, 1 Samuel chapter 15 verse 5, the city of Amalek. That phrase that many readers overlook, assuming it was just a nomadic camp, now has a concrete archaeological candidate. It must be said honestly, the identification is debated. The scholar Nadav Naaman has argued that Tel Massos was actually an early center of Edom. Others associate it with coastal groups. The discussion remains open, but the possibility that it is Amalek is serious, defended by top-level archaeologists, and dramatically changes the image we have of this people, and that destroys a false image that many preachers reproduce. Amalek was not just a band of hungry desert raiders. Amalek was an organized people, with a king, with an economy, with its own religion, with military capacity, with commercial networks reaching all the way to the southern Arabian Peninsula. When Saul marched against them, he was not chasing nomads in tents. He was attacking a regional power that controlled copper, the metal from which weapons, tools, coins were made. And that is why this is what almost no one preaches: Saul's decision to keep the good and destroy only the despicable. That decision was not just spiritual disobedience. It was economic plunder. Saul wanted the copper. He wanted the quality livestock raised along the Arab routes. He wanted the king alive, possibly to negotiate tribute. He turned a divine mandate into a commercial operation. And the king who accepted the enemy's copper became the king who lost the kingdom. But before continuing, I need to show you something from the original language that almost no one notices. Archaeology answers the how. The question of why is buried in a single Hebrew word from Deuteronomy 25, and that word completely changes how this judgment is understood. Stay until the end, because what I'm about to show you connects that buried city with something that is probably happening in your life right now, and you had not connected. If you are watching, drop a like now. That directly helps more people reach this level of biblical depth. I have no hype to ask you for here, but the like matters double. Let us go to the Hebrew. Deuteronomy chapter 25 verse 18 describes Amalek's initial attack with a verb that appears very rarely in the Hebrew Bible. The common translation says, "He came out to meet you on the way." But the Hebrew says, Asher Karja Badarej. The root Karja has a phonetic kinship with the root that means cold. Ancient masters saw an image there. Imagine boiling water, so hot that no one dares to step in. That was Israel after crossing the Red Sea. The terror of the nations, described in the Song of Moses himself after the crossing, had fallen upon all the peoples along the way. It was an invisible shield, and Amalek did something no one else dared. He stepped into the boiling water. He was burned. He lost the first battle, yes, but by stepping in, he cooled the water for everyone else. He showed the world that this people could be attacked, that the shield was not absolute, that the God of Israel did not protect every flank. That was not a military act. It was a theological act, an attack on the reputation of God among the nations. And that is why verse 16 of Exodus 17 closes with a phrase that almost no preacher underlines, because the hand of Amalek was lifted against the throne of the Lord. Kezia, says the Hebrew, against the throne, not against the people, against the throne. This changes the nature of the judgment. Egypt attacked Israel to enslave it. It was a crime against the people. Babylon destroyed the temple. It was a crime against the city. Assyria deported the northern kingdom. It was a crime against the nation. But Amalek attacked the very throne of God, the authority, the sovereignty, the very idea that there is a king who reigns over the nations. And a crime against the throne is not punished like a crime against a subject. It is punished with the dissolution of the aggressor. But not even that is the complete peace. And now, something is noticed about the first attack at Rephidim that only appears when you read the immediate context. Verses before the attack, in Exodus 17 verse 7, Israel has just asked a question. A question the text records with two geographical names so no one will forget. They called the place Massa and Meribah, testing and quarrel. The question was, is the Lord among us or not? And the next verse begins with a Hebrew word that almost no one translates with precision, ve'avo. And then, it was not afterwards, it was not later, it was then. Immediate causality, Israel doubts, and then Amalek appears. The internal connection of the text is what archaeology could not show. Amalek appears where doubt appears. The ancient masters noticed it because in the Hebrew system where each letter has a numerical value, the word Amalek and the word doubt, Safek, add up to exactly the same. 240. For them it was no coincidence, it was a clue written in the language. Where doubt is born, Amalek appears. Where Amalek appears, it is because the doubt was already there. That is the signature of the pattern you will start to see once you know how to look at it. Every time Israel is spiritually weak, just when it is about to doubt, just when it asks itself if God is still there, Amalek appears. Not to conquer, not to take territory, to exploit the doubt, to widen the crack, to make the moment of possible return to God turn into defeat before the return happens. We will see it in 4 concrete scenes, one by one, separated by centuries, separated by geographies, but united by the same surgical mechanism. And when you finish seeing them, you will not be able to read the Bible the same way. First scene, Rephidim. But before the verse of the attack, let me set the scene for you. The sun is at its zenith. The temperature exceeds 45 degrees. Dust rises with every step. Israel has just left a place where God miraculously brought water out of a rock, and even so, the faces show suspicion. The elderly women walk at the end of the column, leaning on their staffs. The mothers carry babies crying with thirst. The children walk behind, exhausted, and at the front the men murmur. Massa, Meribah, those 2 names are already engraved in the people's memory. Testing, quarrel. Is the Lord among us or not? Without warning, a cloud of dust appears on the crest of the horizon. It is not the pillar of fire. It is not the cloud of glory. It is a cloud of hooves, horses, camels, swords reflecting the desert sun. They come from the south, from the direction Israel has just passed through. And they do not head for the front of the army. They surround. They aim at the rear, at the elderly women, at the mothers, at the tired children. The signature of the enemy is clear from the first attack. Aim at the straggler. Attack the weak. Take advantage of the moment when God's people doubt. Israel asks if God is there. Vayavo Amalek. And then came Amalek. But there is a detail almost everyone misses. The battle was not won by the sword. It was won by something happening on the top of a mountain. When the leaders' hands were raised toward God, Israel prevailed. When the hands came down, Amalek prevailed. Exodus 17, verse 11. The victory over Amalek was never military. It was always spiritual. And any attempt to defeat this enemy with human strategy, with numbers, with power, with copper, is doomed to failure. That is the first law of Amalek, the strength of hands raised, not the strength of the army below. And look at something else in that scene. The leader grew tired. The hands grew heavy. The concentration broke. 2 people, one on each side, came near and held the arms up. Aaron and Hur. That image is the complete formula. The battle against Amalek is never fought alone. Never. The person who tries to defeat this pattern with their own willpower, with mental discipline, with self-help, is going to lose. The mountain is needed. The hands raised are needed, and community holding the arms is needed. Take away one of those 3 elements, and the result reverses. And notice the detail of verse 12. Aaron and Hur did not hold the leader's arms for a few minutes. They held them until the sun went down. The battle lasted all day. The intercession lasted all day. The community sustained all day. That tells you how long this kind of combat lasts. It is not a brief crisis. It is a journey. And those who give up halfway lose, not because the battle is unfair, but because the battle always demands lasting longer than the enemy's tiredness. Amalek gets tired, but the sun sets for everyone. What decides is who held on until sunset with hands raised. And there is more. When the victory came, Moses built an altar and gave it a name. Exodus 17 verse 15. Jehovah Nissi. The Lord is my banner, my flag. And notice the detail almost no sermon mentions. Israel had already left Egypt. It had already seen the plagues. It had already crossed the Red Sea. It had already received the manna. It had already seen water come out of the rock. And yet, the first permanent altar the people built after the Exodus was not to celebrate any of those miracles. It was to celebrate the victory over Amalek. Why? Because the victory over Amalek is not a military victory. It is the victory that defines the identity of a people who learn to defeat Amalek, learn to defeat doubt. A people who defeat doubt remain in God. A people who remain in God can no longer be defeated by any other enemy. That is why this was the first victory of the Exodus that deserved a permanent altar, because it marks the moment when a people stops being a recently freed slave and becomes a mature people of God. Second scene. 40 years later, the 12 spies have just returned from Canaan. 10 bring a negative report. The land is good, they say, but it is full of giants. It is impossible. The people rebel. They cry all night. They want to go back to Egypt. They want to choose a new leader. It is the biggest rebellion of the Exodus. God pronounces judgment. That generation will die in the desert. Only Caleb and Joshua will enter the land. After that, the people try to fix things, but not out of repentance, out of practical remorse. They want to undo the consequences without changing the heart. And they decide, without God ordering it, to attack Canaan on their own. Moses warns them directly. Verses 42 through 43, "Do not go up, because the Lord is not among you. You will fall by the sword before your enemies." But they go up. Verse 45, "The Amalekite and the Canaanite came down and struck them and pursued them as far as Hormah." Wait, Hormah, stop right there, because some archaeologists, including the team that excavated Tel Massos, have proposed that this site could be precisely Hormah, mentioned in the Bible as a point of Israelite defeat and later as a point of victory. If the identification is correct, that battlefield where Israel fell in Numbers 14 is on the same ground as the city of Amalek that Saul would attack centuries later. The same land catching the people of God in 2 different generations. The word Hormah in Hebrew comes from the same root as Jerem, consecrated destruction. That is, the place where Israel was defeated bears engraved in its name the word of judgment, place of destruction. And the terrifying thing is this: Israel tried to conquer the place that would later be the place of total consecration, but it tried without God. And what was supposed to be Jerem offered to God became Jerem suffered by Israel. When you try to do God's work without God, you end up being a victim of the very work you were trying to do. And look at the clinical signature. Israel is not attacked when it is strong. It is not attacked when it obeys. It is attacked at the exact moment when it wants to fix what it broke, but wants to fix it without God. The moment when the sinner desires the result of repentance without going through repentance itself. That is the favorite hunting ground of Amalek. And if what I am saying makes you uncomfortable, pay attention, because most likely that mechanism touches you closer than you think. Third scene. Saul, about 3 centuries later. 1 Samuel 15. God sends the prophet Samuel with an order of Jerem, consecrated destruction. Saul marches against Amalek with an army. Here, an important archaeological and historical note. The Hebrew text says that he mustered 200 eleph of soldiers. The word Eleph is commonly translated as thousand, but many scholars of biblical Hebrew, including researchers like Colin Humphreys, have argued that in ancient military contexts, Eleph can mean a combat unit, not necessarily 1,000 individual men. Whatever the exact figure, the army was large enough to take the city of Amalek and defeat King Agag. That is already a narrative fact of the text. And now look at the geography the text gives. Verse 7, Saul attacked the Amalekites from Havilah to Shur, opposite Egypt. That strip covers exactly the corridor where archaeology has identified the main Amalekite settlements, from the Negev to the eastern border of Egypt. The biblical text is geographically coherent with what archaeology can reconstruct. But right there, exactly in that place, Saul made the decision that sank his kingdom. It was not just disobedience, it was selective plunder. Verse 9. They spared Agag and the best of the cattle, of the fattened animals and of the lambs, and of all that was good, but everything vile and despicable they destroyed. Read that slowly. They destroyed what was useless. They kept what was valuable. And considering the possibility that they were in a city like Telmassos, loaded with copper, with incense, with elite livestock raised along the Arab trade routes, that decision was not pious. It was greedy. Saul did not spare Agag out of compassion. He spared him because a living king is worth tribute. A dead king is worth nothing. Picture the scene. The city has fallen. Israelite soldiers walk among the burning warehouses. The smoke mixes with the smell of molten copper. In the center of the main square, Agag is bound, watching with the cold dignity of a condemned king, and Saul approaches, not with the sword in his hand to fulfill the Jerem. He walks carefully, looking at the warehouses still smoking. There is wealth here, tons of copper ready to be smelted into weapons for Israel. Superior breed livestock, brought along the incense routes from Arabia. A living king who is worth tribute. The inner voice whispers, "This is not disobedience, Saul. This is wise administration. God will not want us to lose this." And the hand of the king of Israel, without him perceiving it, writes in that instant the last chapter of his own reign. When Samuel arrives and asks him what happened, Saul answers something that betrays his heart. "I have fulfilled the word of the Lord." In his mind, he had fulfilled it. That is the clinical mark of partial obedience. It does not recognize itself. It believes it has obeyed. And Samuel, with one of the sharpest phrases of the Old Testament, answers, 1 Samuel 15, verse 22, "To obey is better than sacrifice, to pay attention better than the fat of rams, for rebellion is as the sin of divination." That phrase deserves a moment. Rebellion is like divination. Why? Because both rebellion and divination try to obtain a result by going over God's head. Divination asks the future without God. Rebellion seeks good without God. Both leap over the throne. Both attack, in the terms of Exodus 17, the Kezia, the throne itself. Saul, without knowing it, when he plundered Amalek, repeated the sin of Amalek. He attacked the throne, and that is why he lost the throne. Partial obedience always dresses itself as total obedience, and always, without exception, it pays with the loss of the very thing it was trying to preserve. There is an external detail that few preachers know and that confirms how real this people was. In the topographical list of Pharaoh Shishonk I, engraved on the walls of the Temple of Karnak around the year 925 before Christ, the name Am-el-Qw appears. Many Egyptologists vocalize it as Amalek. The list records the names of peoples of the Negev and the region of Judah during a campaign that the Bible also records briefly. And before that, the Anastasis 6 papyrus from the 13th century before Christ mentions raiders called Amalek, who harassed Egyptian outposts on the southern desert roads. The phonetic and geographical overlap with Amalek is hard to explain by chance, which means this: Egypt, the empire Israel had just left, already knew the Amalekites and recorded them as desert raiders. When Israel left Egypt and met Amalek, it did not run into an unknown people. It ran into the regional plague that all empires suffered. And God chose for Israel to face that plague first, before any other enemy. That was no accident. If this is blowing your mind, share the video with someone who needs to hear this. There are believers who have preached 1 Samuel 15 for decades and never connected Tel Masos, Sheshonk I, and Anastasis 6 with what they were preaching. The Bible and archaeology do not contradict each other here. They confirm each other. And let me tell you something about what this means for your faith. When a believer reads the Bible and feels that the stories seem too big to be real, a Persian king, an imperial decree, a nomadic commercial empire, armies, fortified cities, precise dates. That feeling comes from being formed to believe that the Bible is a book of moral tales. It is not. It is a book of history, politics, geography, and theology combined. The Amarna letters record vassal kings asking for help from the pharaoh. The Mesha Stele records battles with Israel. The Tel Dan inscription mentions the house of David. The list of Karnak records Amalek. Every time an archaeologist lifts a shovel in the Holy Land, the shovel digs up confirmation, and the confirmation matters because your faith rests in part on the fact that the people, places, kings, and nations the Bible mentions existed. They exist, and they continue to be silent witnesses that the book in your hands is not fiction. Fourth scene, 500 years after Saul, Persia, Esther chapter 3. The most extensive empire of the ancient world, with subjects from India to Ethiopia, according to the first verse of the book. A man rises, Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. The word Agagite is exactly the clue the text leaves you to make the connection. He is from the line of Agag. The Amalekite king Saul was supposed to eliminate. The line survived. Saul's partial obedience, that greedy decision to keep the king alive, and the copper and the livestock, produced descendants who waited 5 centuries to come back with multiplied power. And Haman does what no other enemy of the Jews had ever done. He does not ask for extra taxes. He does not propose restrictions. He asks for total annihilation. On a single day, in all the provinces, young and old, children and women. Esther 3, verse 13. The first documented plan of total extermination of the Jewish people in history. The same signature of Amalek. Attack the weak, attack to destroy, not to conquer. Aim at the people covered by God's shield and demonstrate that the shield was not absolute. Picture the Persian king on his throne. Haman enters with a decree he has carefully drafted. He argues, there is a people, he says, scattered among the nations of the empire. Their laws are different. They do not assimilate. They do not benefit us. It is better that they not exist. Esther 3, verse 8. And look at the terrifying detail. Haman said that before a king who did not even know that the queen was Jewish. Queen Esther. Haman has just asked for the death of the king's wife without knowing it. And the king, distracted, gave him his ring, the seal ring, the instrument of irrevocable decree. The trap was complete. The line of Agag, which survived through Saul's greed 500 years before, had just captured the largest administrative apparatus of the ancient world. Now comes one of the most perfect ironies of the entire Bible. Haman builds a gallows, 50 cubits high, to hang Mordecai, the Jew who would not bow before him. The gallows is ready. Haman only needs the king's signature, but that very night the king cannot sleep. He asks that the records of the kingdom be read to him, and by chance they open the page where Mordecai, years before, had saved the king from an assassination plot. By chance. The king had never rewarded him. Therefore, the king decides to honor Mordecai precisely the morning Haman comes to ask for his death. The gallows remained empty. until it was filled. With Haman, the line of Agag ended hanging from the very instrument it had built. That is the mark of God when he responds to the attack on the throne. And now look at the spiritual context. Who were the Jews of the book of Esther? Those who stayed in Persia when King Cyrus allowed the return to Jerusalem. Those who preferred assimilation over return. Those who chose the comfort of the empire over the risk of returning to the promised land. A community spiritually disconnected from its land, without a temple in its lives, without sacrifices. And that is why the book of Esther has a unique characteristic in all the Bible. The name of God does not appear even once. 10 complete chapters, 0 mentions of the divine name. It is not a literary accident, it is a spiritual portrait. That community lived without openly invoking God, and exactly at that moment, at that point of greatest spiritual distance of the people, Haman appeared. The line of Amalek found the perfect moment. The collective doubt, the assimilation, the silence of God in public life. Picture the life of a Jew in Susa, capital of the empire. Your job is merchant or minor official or craftsman. Your house is built in the Persian style. You eat what your Persian neighbor eats. Your children play with the children of the Gentiles. You know your grandparents came from the Babylonian exile 60 years ago. You know that some distant relatives returned to Jerusalem with Ezra and Nehemiah. But your life is no longer there. It is here. And here there is no temple. There are no priests. There are no sacrifices. There is no Yom Kippur with smoke rising from the altar. There is only a memory that is fading. That is the generation Haman found. That is the spiritual fragility needed for that old strategy to find its moment. And God, in his mercy, did not allow the silence to be completed. He raised up Mordecai. He positioned Esther. He moved the heart of a pagan king. He turned the assimilation that almost extinguished the faith into the setting of a documented rescue for all generations. 4 scenes: Rephidim, Hormah, Saul's war, Haman's decree. 4 different centuries, 4 different geographical contexts, but one surgically precise mechanism. Amalek appears where Israel is spiritually weak, where it has just doubted, where it is trying to fix without repenting, where it is assimilated and silent, not at other moments, only at those. And that mechanism is what no other enemy of Israel had. Egypt attacked Israel to enslave it, regardless of the spiritual state of the people. Babylon attacked to conquer, Assyria to deport. Every other enemy was opportunistic in geopolitical terms. Amalek was opportunistic in spiritual terms. And there is a 5th scene that confirms the mechanism in the opposite direction. It is the only occasion in all the Bible where someone defeated Amalek and did not lose. And it is worth seeing because it reveals what the correct formula is. 1 Samuel 30. David was fleeing from Saul, hiding in a city called Ziklag, which the Philistine king had given him. And while David was far away with his men, the Amalekites attacked Ziklag. They burned it. They took the women and the children captive, including David's 2 wives. The signature is exactly the same. They attacked the straggler. They attacked the weak. They attacked at the moment when David was most vulnerable, far from his home, pursued by his own king, with no more territory than a city lent by an enemy. And look at what David did. Verse 6. David was greatly distressed because the people spoke of stoning him. His own men wanted to kill him. It was the lowest possible moment. But the text adds in the second part of the same verse, David strengthened himself in the Lord, his God. That is the difference. Saul, in his moment of temptation with Amalek, listened to his people and kept the spoils. David, in his moment of crisis with Amalek, ignored his people and strengthened himself in God. Saul lost the kingdom. David strengthened his path to the throne. The difference between the two was not the circumstance. It was the direction toward which they turned their face in the crisis. David consulted the Lord. "Shall I pursue this troop?" says verse 8. And God answered him, "Pursue them, for you will surely overtake them, and without fail recover everything." David caught up with the Amalekites. He defeated them, and he recovered everything. Verse 19. Nothing was missing, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil nor anything. Everything was restored, every person, every object, every animal. That is what happens when you face Amalek with the correct direction of the face. Nothing is lost, everything is restored. That fifth scene is the promise for you. When you face the ancient pattern in your own life, when the voice appears exactly in your moment of return, if you strengthen yourself in the Lord your God, if you consult and obey, what the enemy stole comes back. Lost time, broken relationships, destroyed opportunities, snatched peace. David did not recover part, he recovered everything. And that is the promise that stands. And now you have the data for the answer of the title. Why did God order Amalek to be wiped out, and not Egypt, not Babylon, not Nineveh? Because every other enemy of Israel attacked what Israel had: land, wealth, manpower, position. But Amalek attacked what Israel could become. It attacked the process of return. It attacked the moment when the people, after falling, could rise again. It attacked repentance itself. And God does not forgive what opposes forgiveness. He does not forgive what attacks the mechanism of forgiveness. Egypt recognized God's power after the plagues, and that is why Isaiah chapter 19, verse 25, prophesies one of the most astonishing phrases of the Old Testament. "Blessed be Egypt, my people." Read that again. The empire that enslaved Israel 430 years receives the designation "my people" in a messianic prophecy. Babylon, the empire that burned the temple, received mercy through Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. And King Cyrus, the Persian, was incredibly called the Lord's anointed in Isaiah 45, verse 1. Anointed, the same word used for Messiah. Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, the cruelest empire of the ancient world, was forgiven when Jonah preached. Every enemy nation at some moment bent the knee. Only one did not bend. Only one was not invited to bend. Only one received the sentence of total erasure, because only one had turned the attack on repentance into its national identity. But if God was so severe with Amalek, why does the last mention of the Amalekites in the Bible seem so calm? 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verses 42 and 43. In the days of Hezekiah, 500 men of the tribe of Simeon went to Mount Seir and defeated the last Amalekites who remained. Verse 43, final words. And they have dwelt there to this day. Dwelt there. The Simeonites dwelt there. The Amalekites, no. The Amalekites ceased to exist. And the chronicler, the scribe who wrote that verse centuries later, records the fulfillment of Exodus 17. The memory was erased, the name was silenced, and from then on, no one else is called an Amalekite in any inscription, in any tablet, in any archaeological record of the ancient world. The sentence was fulfilled. Picture the scene of the last day. Mount Seir, on the borders of the territory of Edom. 500 warriors of the tribe of Simeon, one of the smallest tribes, a tribe that many almost forget in the lists, climbed the slope. The last Amalekite families live hidden in caves, in isolated valleys, in what remains of a people who once controlled the incense route. The last king is dead. The last riches are scattered. The only thing surviving is the memory of the name. And the Simeonites, fulfilling an order given 700 years before in the Sinai desert by a leader named Moses, finished the task. The sun sets that afternoon over a world where Amalek no longer exists as a nation. The promise of Exodus 17 has just been fulfilled down to the last detail, And the chronicler, writing centuries later, still marks with admiration that fulfillment. To this day, that is, until the day the chronicler dipped his pen, and that to this day extends also until today, until this moment. Because 3,000 years later, it is still true. Amalek as a nation does not exist. We have arrived at the part you have to understand, because it is your turn. Amalek as a nation ceased to exist almost 3,000 years ago. God fulfilled his word. He erased the name. But the spirit, no. And this is the point where the buried city of Tel Massos, the attack at Rephidim, Saul's plunder, and Haman's decree become personal. Look at your life for a second. Every time you are close to returning to God after a period of distance, every time your heart begins to soften, every time you decide to open the Bible again, to pray again, to go back to church, to return to something you left, what happens? Almost always, in that exact moment, something appears. A crisis, a distraction, a wound from the past that comes back, a voice that says, "You have failed too many times. God no longer hears you. You are a fraud. You are going to fall again." There is a scene you have probably lived. You decide on Sunday, tomorrow I am going to start reading the Bible again. I am going to pray every day. I am going to seek God seriously. You go to bed with that decision, and when you wake up Monday, the phone already has 3 urgent messages. A family emergency has come up, a work commitment has been moved up, and the plan evaporates before breakfast. Coincidence? It could be, but if this happens every time you decide to return, it is no coincidence, it is the pattern. Or this other one. You are leaving a habit you know is taking you away from God. You have gone 30 days without falling, 40 days. You feel it is already conquered. And exactly when you let your guard down, just when you think the worst has passed, the temptation comes back with a force it did not have before. It is not the same temptation. It is stronger, more cunning, more timely. It attacked the straggler, it aimed at the tired one. It came when your spiritual energy was at its lowest. That signature is 3,000 years old. Or this third one. You are considering returning to church after months or years away. And the first Sunday you decide to go, exactly that Sunday, a toxic family conflict comes up that makes you want to stay home. Or a spiritual tiredness with no apparent reason. Or a voice that says that church disappointed you before, you are going to come out more hurt. And the chair stays empty, and the voice wins another battle. That voice knows perfectly when to attack. Or this fourth, perhaps the most subtle of all. You are not falling into sin. You are not openly doubting. But you have spent months feeling lukewarm. You read the Bible and feel nothing. You pray and it seems a monologue. You go to church and the hymns do not move you. Just when you begin to notice the lukewarmness and want to come out of it, a good opportunity appears. A promotion that demands more hours, a project that takes up the time of prayer, a legitimate success that fills the space where God used to fit. And legitimate success does not look like sin, so you do not raise your guard. That is Tel Massos in modern format, the productive fortress built without God. And the ancient spirit knows that the best way to prevent your return is not always the obvious temptation. Sometimes it is success. That voice has an ancient name and a millimetrically known strategy. Attack the weak, attack the tired, attack the straggler. Aim precisely at the one who can defend the least just when he tries to rise. That is not psychological coincidence. It is the signature of an enemy with 3,000 years of experience. And that is why Exodus 17 verse 16 says that the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. It is not a war that ended when the Simeonites exterminated the last Amalekites at Mount Seir. It is a war that continues every time a soul tries to return to God. And the Spirit knows how to use Tel Massos in your life. What is Tel Massos? A fortified city full of copper and incense, but empty of God. How many times have you built a personal version of Tel Massos? A fortified life, productive, successful, commercially prosperous, but spiritually empty. And every time you decide to begin tearing down the walls so that God can come in, the voice appears that says, "Do not tear anything down. This cost you a lot to build." And inside the walls, there is not as much emptiness as you think. That voice protects Tel Massos. That voice attacks the moment of return. That voice is the ancient signature. Look at what is happening with Tel Massos today. It is a mound of earth with old stones. The copper warehouses that were worth fortunes 3,000 years ago are empty. The incense routes no longer pass through there. The people who lived there, their names, their faces, their businesses, their celebrations, their religion, all of that disappeared. The fortified city surrendered not to an army, but to time. Time always wins against Tel Massos. And that tells you something important about any personal version of Tel Massos you may be building. The career you sacrificed years to, the relationship you maintain at the cost of your faith, the project that took up the space where God used to be, the addiction that protects with walls everything that comes to confront it. Each of those things is Tel Massos, and each is destined to the same fate. The sand will cover them, and no one at all will mourn their disappearance. The question is not if your personal Tel Massos is going to fall. It is whether you are going to be inside when it falls, or whether you will have come out in time. And just as Israel did not defeat Amalek by arms, you are not going to defeat this pattern by your own strength. Remember the top of the mountain. The hands raised. When they came down, Amalek won. When they went up, Israel won. And when the leader grew tired, others held his arms up. That means three concrete things. First, the battle is spiritual, not of willpower. Second, it is not fought alone, it is fought sustained by others. Third, while the hands are raised, the victory is guaranteed. But there is a fourth point that ties it all together. And it is the point that connects the mountain of Rephidim with the mountain of Calvary. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25. Christ ever lives to intercede. His hands do not grow tired. His arms do not fall. The intercession of the Messiah is eternal. And this means that the image of Rephidim, the leader with his arms extended toward heaven during the entire battle, found its absolute fulfillment on a cross outside Jerusalem. The cross was the mountain. The extended arms were the hands raised. The sun that set was the moment when the fundamental battle ended. And ever since, the hands remain raised, not by the strength of a tired old man whom two friends hold up, but by the strength of a high priest who needs to be sustained by no one. That is why God erased the name of Amalek, not out of cruelty, out of love. Because the spirit that attacks the sinner's return could not be forgiven without destroying the return itself. And the God who opened that path with blood, with cross, with resurrection, was not going to allow anything to stand between the repentant sinner and the open door of return home. Erasing Amalek was, paradoxically, an act of mercy toward every future generation that would want to return to God. If Amalek had survived as a nation, every spiritual awakening of history would have faced an organized army against it. Instead, God eliminated the organization. He left only the spirit. And against the spirit, believers have an eternal high priest whose hands do not fall. There is something else in the book of Esther that almost no one notices and that closes the circle in a chilling way. When Haman falls, it is not just he who dies. Esther chapter 9 verses 7 through 10 records the execution of the 10 sons of Haman. The entire Agagite line, all the descendants who survived through Saul's partial obedience, all that line was eliminated in a single day. What Saul did not finish 5 centuries before, God made sure was finished in Persia, and the day on which it happened, the 14th day of the month of Adar, became the Feast of Purim, which the Jews celebrate to this day. Read that again. The date Haman chose to exterminate the Jews became the feast where Jews celebrate having survived. Saul's partial obedience collected its last invoice, and God collected his last debt in the reign of a Persian king who did not even worship the God of Israel. And look at the detail of the name of the feast, Purim. The word comes from the Hebrew pur, which means lot, dice, drawing, and its origin is at the beginning of the book. Haman cast lots. Pur, to choose the day of extermination. This is not a decorative detail. Haman cast lots because for him, a descendant of Amalek, everything was chance. There was no God. There was no plan. There was no cosmic justice. Throw the dice, and the day that comes up will be the day of the slaughter. And God took those same dice, that same date chosen at random, and turned it into the most important day of the Jewish calendar after Yom Kippur. The instrument of the enemy became a monument to the victory of the people of God. That is the signature of God when he responds to the attack on the throne. He does not just defeat the enemy, he turns the enemy's weapon into an eternal celebration of his people. And the depth of that is this: Haman built a gallows. That instrument became his own death. Haman cast lots. Those lots became the Feast of Purim. Haman asked for an irrevocable decree. That irrevocable decree became authorization for the Jews to defend themselves. Every weapon the descendant of Amalek formed against the people of God was turned to destroy the one who formed it. It is the ancient promise of the prophet. No weapon forged against you shall prosper. The story of Haman is the documentary proof. That is poetic justice. That is God turning the enemy's weapon into a monument of the victory of the people. And that is exactly what he continues to do in every life surrendered to him. Return to the buried city for a moment. Tel Massos today is just a mound of earth. Tourists can visit it, but there are no great monuments. There are no commemorative plaques. There are no descendants of the Amalekites claiming their heritage. The copper warehouses are empty. The incense route passed through other places. The civilization that controlled that commercial network ceased to exist millennia ago. The sentence of Exodus 17 is fulfilled every day with the silence of the desert. But in Jerusalem, just 120 kilometers to the north, the people whose extermination Haman planned continue celebrating Purim every year. They continue reading the Torah every Sabbath. They continue saying the name of God when the Amalekites stopped being able to say theirs. And that tells you something important about how every spiritual battle of your own life ends. The nation that attacks the return to God always falls. The soul that returns to God always remains. That is the spiritual geometry the Bible repeats from Exodus 17 to Revelation. The civilizations that rise against the throne collapse. The souls that kneel before the throne endure. And between one thing and the other, there is an ancient pattern that keeps trying to prevent the kneeling. If you made it this far, it is probably because there was some moment in this video where you saw yourself, where you recognized the voice, where you remembered a period of your life when just as you were going to return to God, something appeared. An unusual crisis, a strange distraction, a temptation stronger than normal, a spiritual tiredness you could not explain. You are not alone. It is the pattern that 3,000 years of believers have faced and overcome. They faced it with hands raised, with community holding the arms, with an eternal high priest whose intercession never stops. And you are going to face it the same way, because the path of return remains open. The door did not close when Haman fell. It did not close when the Simeonites exterminated the last Amalekites at Mount Seir. It did not close when Christ went up to the mountain of Calvary with his arms extended. It opened, wide open, forever. And while that door is open, the war against Amalek has only one possible outcome: hands raised until the sun sets. There is one more thing, a final image that closes everything. When Christ was on the cross, the Roman soldiers nailed his arms to the wood. It was not Aaron holding one arm and Hur holding the other. It was nails, and those nails, paradoxically, guaranteed what Moses' tired arms could not guarantee, that the hands would not come down, ever. No one could bring those hands down. The intercession that began on the top of that mountain, where Moses trembled with exhaustion, was completed on a cross, where the nails made sure that exhaustion would not decide the battle. And that is why, ever since, every believer who approaches God through Christ enters into an intercession that no longer depends on the strength of an old man, nor on the loyalty of two friends. It depends only on a body nailed 2,000 years ago on a mountain outside Jerusalem, with arms extended exactly like Moses at Rephidim. The city of Amalek is buried beneath the sand of the Negev. The empire Haman tried to use against the Jews fell. King Agag was executed. The name was erased from under heaven. But the path of return remained open, and that, exactly that, is why God never forgave the only dangerous nation that declared war on the throne. Because the throne does not forgive whoever attacks its mercy, but it welcomes anyone who seeks it. There is a video on screen now that connects directly with what we have just discovered. What you are going to see there answers a question you are probably already asking yourself. Click.